But yeah, okay, so welcome everyone to the first of its kind community call. It's our first quarterly community call that we're doing. I'll pass it off to Abby, who will be hosting the call in just a second, but a few reminders that this call will be recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. Please, if you have a question, raise your hand or write it in the chat, and we'll try to get through it as we go through. Please also be kind and respectful to everyone on the call. And yeah, excited to hear some updates. Oh, and there's Cloudhead. Great. And I'll pass it off to you, Abby.
Cool. Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to kick it off with a little presentation. So can everybody see these slides?
Yep.
Great.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So yeah, so guys, welcome to the first of its kind, as Shelby just said, our first quarterly community call. So as you know, we've been doing monthly community calls up until this point. And we think and kind of just like reflected on the role of community calls and what role they should play in our new ecosystem in the org shift, which we'll kind of get to today as well. And we thought that it would actually make more sense to transition away from our monthly cadence to a quarterly cadence, and kind of just like reshift the purpose of these community calls a little bit. So moving forward, we're only going to have community calls quarterly. It'll be on the first Wednesday of the month, at the first month of the quarter. So this means April, July, October, and January. And the purpose of these quarterly community calls is to give orgs a touch point with each other and to give the DAO a touch point with its orgs. So instead of being kind of more in the weeds, like we were doing with our core team updates, these community calls will be a place to share higher level progress updates, announcements, and demos. They will remain a public call open for the community to join, recorded with Google Meets. And we'll still be expecting probably a written update on the forum, just to make sure that we have that written archive here. But so the format won't change that much. Instead of each core team giving a update during the call, we'll have each org give an update. And since they are quarterly and less frequent throughout the year, we can assume that there'll be more higher level updates and announcements here. So the idea is to reduce the amount of calls that everybody has to do with each other, while also giving people an opportunity to sync and just kind of touch base with what else is happening in the ecosystem. And it'd also be an opportunity for Shelby and I to provide the community with DAO-wide updates relevant to governance, to org governance, so things that orgs need to know. And yeah, so we think that this is a good way to move forward. Excited to see how the calls evolve over the next year. I'll pause even right here just for any questions. Does anybody have any questions about this shift that they wanted to ask? No? Okay, cool. Feel free to drop it in the chat if you will. So moving on, the agenda for this quarterly call will be slightly different than the quarterly calls that we have in the future. So first, I just want to give a quick update on our transition to the DAO/org shift work, which I gave at the Tenerife offsite, but not everybody was able to make it. So I wanted to just quickly revisit that here. And then we'll actually be hearing from each org who will be reviewing their upcoming proposal that will be dropping on the forum already dropped on the forum basically this week. So basically each org is going to briefly review and give a little 10-15 minute presentation on what their org is, what work they have lined up for the year and also for the quarter, and any other highlights that they wish to surface from their org proposals. And then moving on into the more details of the foundation org, we'll also have a little review from each committee. I'll revisit what a committee is in my next slide, which will kind of outline the work of marketing, operations, and the DAO governance support teams that will be operating within the foundation org. So this is kind of a level set for everybody to get on the same page of who's doing what, how, and when. And we'll try to give everybody that shared foundation so that we can move into this whole year aligned and clear on basically what our ecosystem is. So to kick off, I'll just quickly revisit the transition to the DAO project that we've been on and kind of level set everybody on where we are in that project. Again, this is a presentation that I did at the offsite, and I'm happy to share the more detailed presentation with everybody after the call, but this is just a quick review. So as everybody knows, we've been on the path to increasing decentralization within Radicle. This has been spawned from the early days of the Radicle project, even back when Radicle was monadic, and that we've always envisioned all core maintainers and contributors of the Radicle project to be funded directly via the Radicle Treasury, aka the RadicleDAO. And basically the foundation has been mandated to support the development and growth of collective community infrastructure that can be employed to further decentralize the project and achieve that vision. And so last year, we basically kickstarted that actual path towards the next phase of the RadicleDAO. And started envisioning and structuring what it would take to basically fund and manage all core development via the Treasury. And I will spare the overview on everything that's happened here because it exists on the forum, it exists in many calls, and I'm sure you guys have all heard so much of it that you're sick of it. But the point is that we basically went from where this diagram in which the DAO represents this separate entity from the foundation who was responsible for funding all the development of core teams. And these two entities basically existed separately, with the DAO funding different DAO funded initiatives like grants and the Ecosystem Growth Fund. And now where we are now, or where we will be in the next couple of weeks as we see these org proposals move through governance, is a more integrated ecosystem in which not only does the DAO fund the development directly of Radicle and drips and grants, but it also funds the foundation directly, who then stewards the development within these different committees and teams. And so just to revisit, what we're doing is basically actually transitioning the foundation entirely within the DAO to be funded by the Treasury. And restructuring our development teams, Radicle and Drips, as separate orgs. And so the vernacular that we use to describe what these little blue circles are orgs. Orgs are basically represent these independent, autonomous organizations that are basically funded directly via the Treasury. They have their own purpose, their own mandate, their own contributors, and their own budgets, and basically align with the purpose of the greater DAO. And so the current orgs that we have right now, or that are being proposed that in this first phase of the transition, we are the Radicle, which is Alexi will be speaking on today, Drips, which Ellie will be speaking on today, Grants, Boredom will be speaking on today, and the Foundation org, which I'll be speaking on today. And the note here is that the Foundation org also represents the work of 3 separate committees, those being operations, marketing, and governance. And we'll get into what it means to be a committee. But basically, these 3 committees represent different domains of work that the Foundation org is funding in support of the orgs and the greater DAO. So that's this is basically the diagram. If someone says, what is Radicle? This is what you can share them. This is what we are now. Once these governance proposals pass, if they do through governance. And we can say that after these governance proposals pass, we can say that we've actually done this first initial transition to the DAO. So the update here is that we're actually kind of in this last mile period in which we're fully, embodying and becoming basically what this ecosystem diagram represents. And so that's a pretty big deal and should be a really exciting milestone to share once we pass it. So I'll pause there. Again, I just want to highlight that all of this there's been a lot of information with regards to this transition to the DAO stuff. And if you, I'll share my presentation that I did in Tenerife for people who want a little bit more detail into the decisions that were made along the way, but we'll definitely be doing a retro on everything that's happened as well. So, but in an effort of time, I kind of want to pass it directly off to the org proposals. I can take questions maybe at the end of the call with regards to the transition to the DAO stuff, because I'm sure that the orgs have a ton of stuff that they want to share. So great. So we'll be hearing from Radicle, Drips, Grants, and the Foundation today. And so I will pass it off to maybe Radicle first. Cloudhead, if you want to take it away.
Yeah.
I'll stop sharing my screen. That was a statement and also a question.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll share the document myself, I guess.
Great.
So, yeah, so this is the document that was shared on the forums for the Radicle org. I don't know how much, 10 minutes, 5 minutes? I guess I'll just go through it once pretty quickly, and then we can dive into the various parts if there's questions or anything like that. But basically, I mean, like everyone knows, Radicle, it's designed to be a secure, decentralized alternative to code forgers such as GitHub and GitLab, while preserving user sovereignty and freedom. There's a bunch of risks and issues that Radicle mitigates. These are all essentially listed here. You can find that on the forum post. And the way it addresses that is essentially via cryptography, via peer-to-peer networking, being open source, censorship resistant, and etc. By being a protocol instead of a platform, essentially. This is kind of elaborated on in this little section here. Then in terms of like annual strategy, objectives, and all that stuff. So I mean, the big thing is being able to get users to transition from GitHub to Radicle or GitLab to Radicle. We need feature parity. It doesn't mean like all features. It just means the core features, like the stuff that people really need, that they use every day. So stuff like GitHub Wiki probably is not something we need to worry about for now. So we've defined the core features, and this is our own kind of understanding of it and definition of it. So repository hosting, issues, PRs, CI/CD, users, orgs, search, notifications. It's in this order, so from most important to least important, as part of the core features still. So that's kind of the North Star, is essentially to have all of this stuff working really well with the properties we like, the sovereignty essentially of Radicle. And then the sub-objectives are essentially for this year to stabilize the technology stack, so the networking and storage and all that stuff, and to relaunch our social media presence. So the Radicle Twitter has been pretty quiet. The blog has been pretty quiet. So we want to this year essentially relaunch all of that, new brand and more actively maintained communication, basically. I guess do I go into the roadmap for the year, or is that too much detail?
I think that's a great amount of detail. I mean, at least okay. I'd love to hear it. Yes.
Okay. So roadmap. So this quarter that just passed was essentially about the initial kind of internal Heartwood release. It's public, so some external people are trying it, but it's really meant kind of as a soft launch, let's say. Move the core team collaboration to Radicle, implement patches, issues, and finish the brand redesign. So this has been going well. So I mean, as of today, actually, we've officially asked everyone to use Radicle for collaboration, at least on the Heartwood repo. So we're starting on this. We have patches, issues, and code repos, both on the web and on the CLI, and the brown design is a couple weeks delayed, so we should have it like end of the week or the next. Q2 is really about code review on the product side, because that's kind of the big feature that we need to collaborate effectively. So even having patches and issues is not really enough if you can't like submit detailed reviews of code. That's something we rely on a lot, and most developers do too. So that's kind of the most important feature to develop next is code review. On the app, on the web app more generally, we want to refresh it a little bit, implement maybe a new landing page with that's a bit more exciting. Patches and issues is kind of like needs mainly polish and some more features, and then launch a new community seed node that is using the new protocol that users can sort of use. But of course, everyone runs their own node anyway, so it's not going to be like before where it's like the only node running. It's mainly just going to be to have some help for things to replicate between users. Then after that, it's getting a bit fuzzier, but I think Q3 starting to look into radical identities beyond public key IDs. So things like user profiles with avatars and stuff like that to create like a developer profile. And then Q4 and Q3 and Q4, like, you know, they could be swapped, like depending on what seems more urgent at the time. But Q4 here we have it on CI/CD because this would complete the if there was like a core of the core, like a feature set within these, it would be the first four here, or let's say the first five. And so completing these at least a basic version of them by the end of the year would be really cool. Yeah, I mentioned here secure artifacts. So this is kind of like our own version of GitHub releases, which we'll see if we have time for it. It depends on how hiring goes and a bunch of things. But we'd like to allow users to essentially submit signed releases, binary releases, and stuff like that. So that's basically roadmap and kind of what we're working on. And for those who don't know, because I didn't really mention it here, but the Radicle stack is essentially a protocol, a command line interface, and a web app. So we're kind of working on all of these fronts at the same time. In terms of the team, legal structure is going to be based in Switzerland. The team is listed here. I mean, most people know the team. Nothing super new, but we are planning to. We are planning to expand by probably 2 people, 3 people, maybe. I have a bit more details on that lower down. In terms of comms, we've launched our new Zulip, which has been great. We have our core team repos on our Radicle seed node, which needs to be cleaned up a little bit, but the stuff is there. We have our GitHub, which is still shared with Drips. So yeah, I think Drips is eventually going to move. Twitter, which will be also sort of rebranded and everything. And then Mastodon is not yet launched. It works if you click on it, but we don't really have any content there yet. And then we'll have some monthly dev calls to kind of replace the DAO-wide community calls, which are going to be open calls discussing product and development. Reporting success criteria. So there's no like hard numbers yet here because we're pretty early. But essentially, the things we're going to be looking at and comparing with today is essentially, the activity on the network, which is number of repos and code and issues and all that stuff. Number of nodes, so like the network health itself, like how many nodes user nodes are running. If any key projects are on Radicle, so if we're able to get some famous project to start using Radicle, that would be cool. Although that's maybe going to be one of the hardest parts. yeah, our Zulip community, and then our contributors on the product and protocol. So this year is, I think, almost more important to grow the contributor base and the user base, because we like our initial users to kind of be very, very close and also be contributing. Yeah, so the budget, I'm not going to go into every number, but of course, development cost is by far the biggest cost, and it's for about a team of 12 people. So we'll see if we manage. Right now we're 9. If we manage to hire 3 people by the end of the year, we'll see. I mean, it's possible, but there's a little buffer. Yeah, offsites, 2 offsites a year. There's some initial setup costs and operational fees. And yeah, in terms of fund management, not super exciting, but we'll have a multi-sig, and then I mean, here I'm saying org's bank account, but we're probably going to use Skyline, depending on if we're able to open a bank account or not. But I think in the short term, we're going to use like a payment provider, and then eventually, if we're able to open a bank account without too much hassle, we'll do that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Any questions? Anything I missed? No.
No, I think it's good to see a roadmap as well. So I think that's really awesome to see how the Heartwood release is playing out, and what you're envisioning for the public launch as well.
Cool.
So I feel like this is one of the first times that we've had a roadmap publicly.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see how, end of Q2. The idea is to have some kind of public launch. We'll see how like what kind of community we want to onboard there, if it's like how wide we want to go. But I think we still kind of want to grow fairly slowly in a fairly controlled way. So it's probably going to be, that's why I'm here saying kind of focus on cross communities, P2P, Bitcoin. So like people who kind of know us, or who are already kind of a little bit attuned to this kind of technology, essentially.
Great. And my only follow-up question is, could you share like the Radicle repo, the Radicle Heartwood repo that people are collaborating on? I think that's just a cool.
It's on here. So I guess this tab is shared. So it's this one here. So yeah, I can post that here.
Awesome. Cool. Shelby, I'll pass it off to you.
Cool.
You're on mute, Shelby.
I shall unshare.
I just wanted to ask what the plan was for relaunching the Twitter and kind of social media channels. Are you planning to use the marketing community support for that, or do you have a plan like internally to do that?
Yeah. So right now it's we just have an internal plan, because it's really relaunch is kind of a big word. Really, it's refreshing the brand, because we're working on a new brand with an old collaborator. So essentially, like putting that up on Twitter, on Radicle XYZ, and getting all of that to work together. And then it's going to be essentially just tweeting development progress, like development progress updates. So sort of what we used to back in the day. And starting to think about a Radicle blog and all that stuff, but nothing super elaborate at the moment. Just kind of keep a minimum level of communication on there. Yeah, cool. And then I think more long term, it's going to make sense to talk to the marketing team to figure out something more. Like if we want to really grow faster. Yeah.
Awesome. I think Brandon also had a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, did you say what roles? You said you're hiring for 3 roles, right?
I didn't say what roles.
Yeah.
Let me see if I wrote this down, because I don't even remember. Yeah. So basically 2 more engineers and 1 designer. That's the idea at the moment. It's not clear whether it's going to be front end, back end, and UX versus brand or visual designer. But those are generally the areas. I think what's most likely is 1 person on the front end, 1 person on the protocol, and then a designer. It's not clear whether it's going to be more of a UX person like Jules or someone more on the visual side. We're still kind of figuring that out.
Awesome. Angie, you have a question?
Yeah, so thanks, Alexi, for presenting this. This was really great. I wanted to go back to the section on reporting and what was it? Like, it's not success criteria, but
yeah, success criteria.
It is it? Okay. Yeah. You had mentioned all these sort of
metrics or numbers.
Metrics, exactly, that you were going to look at. I would love to hear more about like the reporting that you intend to do on those numbers, because also I think that's super important in holding you and your team accountable for use of funds. Yeah.
So I think what like the MVP of this is basically to like take the numbers today, right? A lot of these numbers are going to be 0 today, right? But let's say like number of members on Zulip is like 36 or something, right? So keep track of the numbers today, and then kind of monitor them, like monitor the growth like every quarter or whatever cadence, and kind of just start to build visibility or an understanding of if we're growing, how fast we're growing, and like that sort of thing. And if a metric seems like like it should be growing more because we're putting a bunch of efforts in there and it's not, then we can identify what the problem is. And if a number is not growing, but we feel like we haven't really put any effort in growing it, then that's probably fine. But I think most numbers we expect to grow if people are actually using Radicle. Except I think the key projects using Radicle, this would be something that we probably need to actively pursue if we want it to change. But the other numbers repositories, nodes online, commit activity, social activity, contributors, and members on Zulip, and maybe like, let's say Twitter followers or something like that. These are numbers that should organically grow if we're doing good work and talking about it.
It would be super useful for for you to include that in the next discussion iteration of this post, and maybe more specifically as well. I'll like put this in a comment on the post itself, but including a status report on where you are today on these numbers, and then to your point, like tracking these numbers over time. It would be great to get context for every time you do this report of numbers to understand whether this was in your expectations or not, for what reasons, and if no growth has happened, then that's because we're not doing this and we've deprioritized this action for X, Y, and Z.
Gotcha.
That would be really interesting.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, can do.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks for the questions, everybody. Just a quick note on what Angie just said is that all of these proposals that we're reviewing right now are actually on the forum, and they will be for the next 2 weeks, and open for discussion. And so if you have questions that arise after this call, I'd really encourage everybody to go in and chime in, reply to the post, and kind of continue the discussion there, because that's basically what these 2 weeks are for. So okay, cool. I'll pass it off to the DRIPS org to review their proposal. Thank you, Alexi, so much for reviewing yours.
Thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Alexi. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yep.
Great. Okay, let me share my screen. Cool. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Is it big enough, or should I zoom in further?
Maybe a little bit of Zoom would be nice.
Okay. Better?
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Great. So hey from me. My name is Ele. Most of you know me. Today I will be presenting the proposal for the DRIPS org for 2023. Before I start, I just want to say a bit of history about where the DRIPS org is coming from. So when we started the Radicle project, back then there were two components to it. On the one side, there was the sovereign code infrastructure that effectively became the Radicle protocol. And then from the beginning, we had a number of ideas about using this new financial infrastructure that was created with crypto networks in order to create new value flows for developers. And at the beginning, this was one and the same. We used to call all of this Radicle, but over time, we basically took the strategic decision to actually separate those two things. Radicle meaning now sovereign code infrastructure, and then DRIPS meaning effectively new value flows funding for forced developers. So that's a bit of the context. In January 2022, a year and a quarter ago, we launched the V1 of the DRIPS protocol. That was our first attempt at actually showcasing a new infrastructure for developers to raise funds. And then over the last year, we learned a lot, and we iterated on the core experiences. And right now we're working on the new version of the protocol that I will be discussing today. Going to the proposal. Starting with the purpose of the team, the team's mission is to enable forced developers to financially thrive. So in short, the DRIPS org is taking on the problem of forced sustainability or funding public goods. You find this thing interchangeably sometimes. And effectively what we do is we develop new protocols, tools, and applications that enable new value flows for developers in order for them to receive funds from their users and supporters. With that purpose in mind, moving to the annual strategy and quarterly objectives, as I mentioned, and as all of you know, we've been working for a while on the second iteration of the DRIPS protocol and application. And today, I'm happy to announce that the DRIPS V2 contracts have been actually deployed on mainnet. So if you go to drips.network, you can actually use this DRIPS V2 contracts on mainnet, and you can see the new application. We're all very, very excited about that. This is not yet a public announcement. This is a community announcement. I know that this video is public, but we still have a bunch of work to do before we officially announce DRIPS V2. We're doing still a lot of work on the language, and we're still building a number of experiences that we consider part of the base package. But we want in Q2 to basically publicly announce the DRIPS V2 contracts and application. You can absolutely use them today. These contracts have been audited now by a number of researchers. So if you're curious and you want to be early, try them out. But yeah, moving back to the roadmap. Thank you for everyone saying congratulations. Going back to the roadmap. So in Q2 2023, the main objective we have is, of course, to announce publicly DRIPS V2 contracts and the application, and then to iterate on many of the core experiences that we have there. Some of the things that we're doing that might be of interest is that we're looking to integrate social linking. So for a developer or for an organization or for a software project, you will be able to showcase certain verified credentials. The goal here is to build trust on who you're funding, right? An Ethereum address is something, but having more confidence that this Ethereum address is associated with this Git repo or with this Twitter profile, etc., gives a lot of confidence, and this is something that we're working on. In addition, we are also exploring deploying the DRIPS V2 contracts in more than the Ethereum mainnet, which is where they are deployed right now, in more places, in more EVM networks. The challenge we're facing there, it's a common challenge that a lot of crypto projects face, which is effectively our DAO, which is the body that is in control of those smart contracts, lives on the Ethereum mainnet. But if, for instance, we deploy on Optimism or on Arbitrum or Zk EVM, right? One of the many scaling solutions for Ethereum, layer 2 networks for Ethereum. Then there we're facing the problem of governance. Effectively, some of our trust assumptions are changing as we try to have our DAO on Ethereum mainnet basically govern contracts in one of these layer 2s. And that's a very, very hard problem that we're doing some research and, following what other organizations are researching as well, with the goal to eventually deploy our contracts in more EVM networks. So in addition, some of the other things that we're doing is we have started user testing and building something that we call continuous dependency funding. This is an old idea of ours, which effectively allows any funder to fund their dependencies, their software dependencies, in a very simple way. So this is something that the team is currently working on, and we've done some user research even with some of you that are in this call. So that's one experience that you should expect. And then another experience that you should expect is it's something that we call awesome lists. It's an idea that allows you to curate a list of projects or individuals. Imagine, like my favorite privacy preserving projects on Ethereum, right? Imagine that being a list that now can be publicly visible and anyone can actually fund that. That's the core idea behind awesome lists. So that's another experience that we're looking to bring to the app in Q2. Moving towards Q3 and Q4. So as we were conducting this exercise, always the further you go from from where you are right now, there's more uncertainty, and generally the team is following an iterative approach where we working with users, go test ideas, and then we build them properly. So it was a little bit hard for us to actually already commit in Q3 and Q4, but I added things that definitely will be there. So for instance, we will continue to iterate on core experiences based on user feedback now that we have live users. We want to integrate the Radicle Code Collaboration Protocol at some point with the assumption that has a stable release in the remainder of the year. We want to conduct an additional audit. There's always the conversation about how many audits are good, how many you need, but it's a complex code base. We feel that as the amount of value locked in our contract is increasing, we would probably want to actually go do a bit more security work. And then finally, as I mentioned before, if there are solutions for governing multiple basically deployments of contracts in different EVM networks, then we would like to at least deploy the Drips V2 contracts on one more EVM network. Yeah, that's with regards to our roadmap. With regards to objective, I'll keep it very simple. We only have one objective for this year, which is to prove product market fit for Drips. So it's that simple. If it's the end of the year and we don't feel like we have product market fit, I'm not going to be super happy. But how do we know we have product market fit? There are two ways where we're looking at this. Of course, the one way to look at this is increased usage and, more importantly, retention, right? If we have retained users that keep funding or fundraising with the Drips protocol, then we know that we have something sticky. And then the second way that we're planning on the second methodology we're planning on following is basically conducting surveys with our users and follow I call it the superhuman approach, where effectively you put a survey out and you ask how disappointed a user would be if the service wasn't around, and then you try to measure how many people reply very, very disappointed, and there's more guidance on that. So that's the only objective we have for this year, and we're working on that iteratively. With regards to metrics, we have a few things that we're planning on tracking. The idea here is to have a DAO analytics dashboard where you can track those in real time. So we don't need to actually keep manually refreshing that, but effectively we have a link that we will be sharing here, and then anyone can go and monitor those metrics on a daily basis. And some of the things that we will be looking at is value transacted monthly and daily, like how much money is actually flowing through the protocol. Specifically here, we're talking about streams or gives, right? We're not talking about splits, because splits is a form of redistribution, but actually like, streams and gives is, money moving from one Ethereum address to another. So that on a monthly and daily basis, unique addresses as a proxy for, users, I guess, in the more traditional Web2 world, both monthly and daily. Total value locked in the protocol, how much money sits in the protocol, right? Even if it's not yet flowing from one address to another. And then finally, and probably most importantly, like, the amount of force projects or public goods projects that are actually raising funds with drips. Yeah, these are the metrics that we planning on monitoring. Like, I'm currently building a Dune dashboard. When we will have that, I will actually share that here. With regards to the organizational structure, so we're also doing something new here. So we are in the process of establishing an entity in Switzerland and not a non-profit entity, a Swiss association, where effectively all core contributors to the project can become members. The way this works is effectively based on one member, one vote. The founding members is basically 6 of us. So myself, like Earth, Wind, Fire, Water, Jason, Jay Turcos, Everett, and Brandon has legs. So this is 6 out of the 9 contributors are starting as founding members, and then Igor, Manuel, and Lucas, that you probably know from the community, they will be starting as contractors. But the idea is for any contributor that's contributing to the project over time to have the ability to join if they want to. That's probably all you need to know with regards to organizational structure. With regards to communication, Dripster Network still is the main place to hang out. So that's that. With regards to Discord, we will be creating a new Discord that will be solely focused on drips. With regards to GitHub and Radicle, when Radicle has that functionality, we will have a new org there that will be solely focused on drips development. And then with regards to Twitter, we already have Twitter /Drips Network. And we're planning on being a lot more active there now that we have things to talk about. With regards to like reasoning and analysis, I think the main thing that is interesting here is, again, just like a bit of context about why we built all of this infrastructure. So, we started with the idea that, we looked at what's out there, and we were looking to build crypto native infrastructure for developers to raise funds from their supporters. And effectively, we went and built all the tools that we couldn't find in the market that we wanted to have. And what came from that is Drip Protocol, which effectively is a streaming and splitting protocol. We think it's the most complete toolkit for developers. It's the only protocol, to our knowledge, that allows many subscribers to stream to many projects. There are a lot of streaming or recurring solutions out there, but they all operate on a one-to-one basis. Here we have optimized that thing for a software project that might have 1,000 or 10,000 supporters. So that's one aspect of it. It's trust minimized. You don't need to trust anyone beyond the RadicleDAO, effectively. And the RadicleDAO would have to upgrade the contracts in order to change something, which is, as you all know, a very lengthy process. So besides that, you don't need to trust anyone with anything. And then comes with all sorts of very handy features like programmatic splitting of funds, which is something that we saw quite a lot of users on Drips V1, and more things like scheduling of payments in the future and more bells and whistles. Yeah, that's a little bit more of the why we build this, what's unique about it. Yeah, and I think that's mostly it. With regards to budget, it's a very similar situation with the Radicle Org. Most costs go towards contributors. We plan on conducting another audit. As I said, that's at least the current thinking. And then with regards to fund management, we don't plan on using bank accounts for this entity, so it will all be crypto. There will be a multi-sig with current contributors in control of any funds received from the DAO, so you will also be able to see the outflows of that account. We prefer that the thing is more transparent. And then for crypto to fiat, if needed for any contributors, we will be using Skyline Digital. Yeah, that's that for me. Yeah, I'll pause here. Yeah, go use drips.net. Any questions? Selby. I cannot hear you, Selby. I don't know if
Oh, you're muted
See,
again.
quite one call. What is up? Okay, thank you for the presentation. I just had a quick question, or I guess two kind of quick questions for, well, one in regards to like the communication channels. So I see on the drips.network, you have this lovely docs page and also a section of like how to get involved, but currently it's only the Discord server. Are you planning on like, is that where folks should go to find like these channels in the future, or just to like know where to point folks, I guess, going forward?
Yeah, so we will add all of those on the main website. We need to do some work in advance, so we need to set up a new Discord, we need to set up a new GitHub, and and ideally, if Radicle is ready, then we can have a repo there as well. So all of those will be on drips.network, and then of course we will be cross-linking from these places to all of the other places. That's the idea.
Cool, great. And my second question, it's not that important. I'll ask it later separately. So if anyone else has any questions, please feel free.
Any more questions?
Yeah, one question.
Yeah.
Do you guys plan to grow the team, or what's
question.
the kind of maybe more long-term vision there in terms of the org?
Yeah, no, we actually have zero budget for new contributors. We think that the team is really well staffed at the moment, and we all enjoy working with each other quite a lot. We have found rhythm, so it's basically 9 of us contributing full-time or part-time. And then for 2023, absolutely no. If things go well, there's the bigger conversation around marketing. The current idea is that we will get marketing support for this year if needed. From the foundation, from the marketing team there. But yeah, if this is going well, I assume that we'll have to spend more and eventually potentially develop a team or work more closely with the marketing team. But yeah, for this year, the answer is no, we're not planning on growing.
Cool. Thanks.
I have
Selby?
another question.
Yes.
This is kind of the same as Angie asked to the Radicle Org Proposal earlier. Of these, you have these kind of objectives and these metrics that you're trying to measure. Of just a question of like, where are you or how are you planning to share the updates on that? Like, is it public, or will it be kind of more internally? Where can people find that, etc.? Would be great to know.
Yeah, no. Makes sense. So I'm currently building this Tune Analytics dashboard that will have most of those. So you will be able to get, for instance, like monthly value transacted, daily value transacted, monthly unique addresses transacting, daily unique address transacting, total value locked. So you will totally be able to get those. The two things that you won't be able to get is probably you won't be able to get FOSS projects or public goods raising funds with drips. And there's a probably for that, depending on how we implement that. So that's the one thing. And then in survey that we will do, you won't be able to get that. So this Tune Analytics dashboard will be public. So anyone will be able to see that. So yeah, you don't need to rely on us to report that. You can see the queries, you can see the data. So that will be there. With regards to any so it's a good question. I maybe on our docs, I haven't done any thinking yet, but we can do some thinking and report back. Yeah, definitely on our Discord and also here on Radicle community, but probably we can also have this more prominent for anyone that is interested in using drips. They could probably access that. I don't see any problem with that. But yeah, with regards to any service we do, that will have to come in our quarterly updates here.
Cool, thanks.
Hey, Ellie, just to piggyback on that question from Shelby, to get sort of a little bit of more of the context around those numbers, that will be part of that chart. Will that be something that's discussed in your monthly calls? Sorry, are you also doing monthly calls?
We don't. We haven't. No. We do weekly sessions that are open for anyone to join, where we just give updates on.
I see.
So
would those, if one wanted more context on why the metrics are the way they are, would that be the place where they would join? and ask more questions there, or do you plan on sort of pushing regular like commentary on the metrics?
Yeah, so I think, like if you want to talk drips, like if you're interested in what we do with drips, etc., like, always just like, join our Discord, like post a question there, and we would like love to talk about this. The same applies for metrics, but the same like applies for our weekly meeting. So we had the number of contributors just showing up there, many times contributor or simply asking questions. So that applies to that as well. Yeah, don't know if that satisfies, if that basically, yeah, like satisfies what you had in mind. But the one unknown I have is that, these monthly updates that we've been doing on the Radicle community are like, it's a nice thing for us. We enjoy that. So probably that's another thing that we could have. We could keep doing these async updates, despite the fact that the community call now will be quarterly. We could keep, providing monthly updates. We like that rhythm. That rhythm is here. So we could also, have some commentary on metrics if this is something that the community is interested in.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool.
Awesome. Ellie, thank you so much for running through that proposal. I think we'll keep it moving along. Again, if you have any further questions, Shelby has dropped the forum post where you can continue the discussion on Radicle.community. So we're approaching at the hour, and I really just want to make sure that we get through the grants and then the foundation org proposal. So let's have Boredom come up to the stage and present the grants proposal, and then I'll just keep the call rolling and review the rest of the foundation org proposal. And if anybody has to hop off, feel free. This is recorded and you can check in later. So Boredom, I'll pass it off to you.
Hi everyone, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll go through this. As a reminder, the grants has gone through 2 seasons. So if you've been following our activity, a lot of this will be stuff you've seen already that was approved before. So you can kind of think of this as a light update with some small changes that are basically just taking the learnings that we've got from the 2 seasons that we've run. So the purpose for grants.org is to find, fund, and guide research and development of any projects that fall outside of the purview of DRIPS or the Radicle Org. I've listed a few strong projects that we've had in the past, but more generally speaking, we basically want to fund 4 main categories, including dependencies that we use. So things like Snapshot, Gnosis, basically just core dependencies that help us facilitate and run grants. We want to allocate budget to just drip to them, which I'll talk more about when I get into the topic of dog fooding. Then we also want a large portion of our budget so far has gone towards core infrastructure. So these are types of projects that are either touching the core product of Radicle or integrating it with some third-party integration. So an example of this is Yorgos's team, who's been working on IDE plugins. That could be considered core infrastructure. Then the use case, we haven't actually funded anything in this realm yet, but we have gotten lots of very interesting grants that we're keen to find a way to fund these. So these could be things like groups who just simply onboard themselves and utilize something that the DRIPS team has built. For example, the DRIPS SDK. And then we've also allocated a small portion of our budget to just give sort of, not randomly, but just sort of the things that generally help Web3 or free and open source software, but that maybe don't necessarily have to do with grants dependencies, core Radicle infrastructure, or use cases of Radicle products. So those are sort of the high-level categories that we're looking to fund. I've broken out the annual goals into 4 main goals and then KPIs for each of them. So I'll just go over those really quick. So one is recruiting. We'd like to onboard grantees and take on a more like role that kind of is actually trying to go out and find people. So far, we've been pretty passive and just kind of like sitting back and having people apply. So we'd like to more actively look for people, and then also onboard grantees to more permanent work within the ecosystem. So this could look like if a team is building a product that's important enough, maybe they create their own sub-DAO within Radicle, or maybe they end up joining. Basically, kind of like they stop working for grants and maybe they start working as maybe contractors or some other sort of more permanent role within any of the other DAOs. So that's one thing that we'd like to try and facilitate. The next is dog fooding. This is a really important one for us, especially given the fact that both of the drips and code collaboration protocols are having launches soon. So we basically just want to make sure that we're using drips to facilitate the payments for grants, and that our grantees, whenever they write code and share their work, that they're using using Heartwood. So the KPI here, like a really easy KPI, is just funding 100% of grants through drips. I say this is easy just because I'm expecting that grantees will want to get paid, so there's an incentive for them to just take payment via drips. Then the harder one is finding a way to get 100% of grantees to use Heartwood. And so we're probably going to come up with some incentives whereby we might give some small percentage bonus on top of grants to get them to, like, you know, push them away from GitHub or whatever other tools they use and more towards our own tools. So you can think of the dog fooding section as like the grant committee wants to dog food, but we also want our grantees to dog food. Another goal of ours is to drip to dependencies. This is just to drip to the 4 dependencies that we rely on, which is Snapshot, Gnosis, Compound, and then the drips teams itself. The easy KPI for this is allocating 4% of our budget, which is roughly 40,000 USDC, and dripping to 4 dependencies. This is as easy as using drips, right? The hard part, the harder KPI is kind of think of it like a stretch goal, is we actually want to work with the 4 dependencies and then get them to onboard 5 of their own dependencies. That way we can actually have drips getting split. And so this more of a stretch goal is, it's kind of like trying to create a network effect, as well as take on somewhat of a sort of sales, kind of like a software sales job, where we actually have to go out and reach out to our dependencies and get them onboarded with their own dependencies. Lastly, we want to bring the community into the fold when we're making grants decisions. We've got a lot of grants that are, to be quite honest, are kind of like, we don't have the domain expertise to really weigh in on them, but we think that the community possibly could help us with voting on and funding certain kinds of grants. So we've been talking to Gitcoin. They have a new tool that should be launching soon called Round Manager. It's essentially a quadratic vote and funding mechanism. So we'd like to look into integrating with them to see if we can't sort of crowdsource voting and funding for these sort of the use case grants, essentially. I put this one last because it is a dependency and there's a lot of things outside of our control. So basically, just like easy goals, just finish researching whether or not this will work, and then deciding on how we use it. And then the stretch goal here is to actually work with Gitcoin on a marketing plan for this, and then using their mechanism, and then getting to funding rounds. So in terms of reporting and success criteria, for each of the goals above, I listed out the sort of easy and stretch goals. We'll be doing quarterly reports. We run our seasons quarterly. So at the end of every season, we've always done a write-up. So we'll just continue doing that, as well as add in an annual report that summarizes all 4 quarters and maybe tries to tease out some kind of common learnings from the sort of at the higher level. the next section is on organizational structure. So just going to quickly go through this. So we've got two kinds of contributors. There's committee members, which I've listed here, and these haven't changed since the last season. And we also have the grantees themselves. Then moving on to voting, we're actually using OtterSpace for voting. And we've already used it. It works great. And what this lets us do is it actually token gates voting. So for example, if we put up something for a snapshot vote, only people with the OtterSpace badge can vote. And basically each of our contributors get one badge, and any of them can vote. So we have a limited number of committee members who sit on the Gnosis Safe. They're able to vote on approving grants, and they're also able to vote on things like governance decisions that go to a snapshot vote. And then the grantees are able to participate with any sort of snapshot votes, so any kind of off-chain decisions. In terms of communication, we've got a repo that people can look at our most up-to-date documentation. We have the Discord here, as well as all the grant applications and reviews are done publicly on Discourse. So we're not changing anything there. It's the same as it's always been. One thing to call out next is timeline and budget. The last season for grants was approved for optimistic funding. As a reminder, unlike the other two groups that went before me, we don't really have a month-by-month budget, and the reason for this is we don't really have a regular cadence of grants. So we just have a pot of money, and when people come in and grant, we sort of we allocate the budget accordingly. So if we have a month where no one applies for a grant, then we're not spending much money. If we have a month where we have 3 grantees who need payment, then we're spending a lot of money. But just to give you some idea, in the last year, we've used roughly 25% of the budget. And then, so yeah, that's just to give you an idea of how fast like the burn rate is. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Any questions? Yeah.
Sorry, I meant to clap.
Oh, okay.
But this is great.
All good.
This is I'm a mess today. This is great. And yeah, good clarification call outs from like the differences between this org and the other orgs for sure.
Cool. I'll stop then. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Boredom. That's really awesome. Cool. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into the Foundation Org Proposal. We're past the hour, so if anybody has to hop, again, feel free. But I'm just going to try to get through this relatively quickly, and I'll be able to continue and answer more questions on the forum. So can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to run through a quick presentation that covers the highlights of the Foundation org, and then briefly show you where you can learn more with regards to the proposal, which is actually still live and active in on-chain voting for the next couple of hours as well. So I'll just start here. So the background behind the Foundation org is spawning from the Radicle Foundation, which everybody knows was founded in June of 2020 with the purpose to support the development of resilient, humane software infrastructures and fund projects and people that develop non-extractive peer-to-peer technologies that promote internet freedom, with those current technologies being Radicle and Drips. The Radicle Foundation was instantiated as a real-world entity that could act as a neutral third party to steward the continued decentralization of the Radicle project. And so its objectives and current objectives have been to deploy capital to support the maintenance and core development of the Radicle and Drip stacks, and support the development of and growth of collective community infrastructure that can be employed to transition the funding of all project development and further governance initiatives to the Treasury as the Radicle DAO. So it's always been an entity that was put in place to steward the continued decentralization of the project. And so now we are transitioning the foundation to become an org within the DAO itself. Not only does this mean that the foundation will become funded directly from the Treasury, but it will also mean that the foundation will be kind of reframed as in service of the DAO and in service of the DAO's org. So what we think that by reframing the foundation to an org will do is clarify the role of the foundation within the Radicle DAO, increase transparency around the foundation's use of funds, and communicate the intentions for ongoing allocations to the foundation from the Radicle Treasury. And as I said, reframe the role of the foundation within this ecosystem versus being a separate entity. It is now part. So it's one of the parts of the ecosystem versus kind of on the outside. And so the way that we've classified the work of the foundation org is into 3 different initiatives, which is org support, Radicle DAO support, and foundation health. And again, I'll show you the discussion post that Shelby, maybe you can also drop in the chat, but there's a lot more detail than I'm going to run through today. So be sure to take a deeper look into that. So org support is basically what the foundation org is doing in support of the DAO's orgs, right? So the foundation currently will be funding support committees. It's kind of like what we are calling them, that conduct work in support of the DAO's orgs. So these committees will work closely with orgs to define what services, we use services very broad, very lightly, but basically what work they need to best support their goals. So specifically Radicle drips and grants. And the idea here is that once a support committee is mature enough to operate autonomously within the DAO, they can be spun out into their own independent org if they desire to. But the idea here is to take all of the contributors and all of the work that falls in between Radicle drips and grants and house it within the foundation org, give them the operational scaffolding and the support that they need to continue doing their work well, and to continue maturing out as a team, as a committee, and potentially then, if they so wish, to also help their transition to the DAO, similarly what, oh my gosh, I can't speak, similarly to what we've done with Radicle and drips. So what this looks like is the foundation org, which has marketing, governance, and operations, and it provides services for the different orgs. This is actually, this diagram is a little bit out of date, sorry about that. So these committees right now are operations, marketing, and governance. I was going to have each committee lead review their own internal proposals that we're working with the foundation org, but I think we'll have to pin that for another time and just ask people to dive in deeper on the forum. But these are the 3 teams with different leads, being Sean with marketing, myself with governance, and Angie and Sal with operations. And the council acting as the, I guess you could say, the layer that helps coordinate and approve the budgets of each individual committee. So having these committees allows us to provide emerging teams with cohesion so they can continue to adapt with and around the project and engineering orgs, meaning Radicle and drips. It also allows us to reframe contributors as contributors to the DAO versus core development, which we could think will help enable a clearer strategy, and reduces the unnecessary operational overhead of running an independent org that, for example, Radicle and drips have had to launch headfirst into. This is allowing us to kind of pin the, the creation of an entity or the introduction of this operational overhead, and while allowing these teams to basically thrive within a supportive environment so that they can continue supporting the orgs to their best and fullest capacity. So the foundation org is also supporting the greater DAO, the Radicle DAO as a whole. There's a lot of operations, legal, community, governance, and marketing relating work that will be done to strengthen the resiliency and growth of the DAO. The foundation org will also broker relationships with third-party DAO service providers and maintain the Radicle DAO ecosystem IP and support with the tracking of evolving legal risks. So there's a lot of work that the foundation org will do, again, as this neutral third-party entity that's basically whose goal is to continue the decentralization of the project and support the increased resiliency and thriving of the greater DAO. And finally, the last objective is actually internal and focusing on the health of the actual foundation, making sure that the foundation meets its obligations with regards to its Swiss jurisdiction and its supervisory authority. So that's the presentation, and then I'll just switch to where this presentation has evolved into, which is the discussion post. So this is the actual foundation org proposal. This proposal was posted earlier than Radicle Drips, as you can see that we're already in the on-chain voting part of this proposal. And the goal here is to make sure that we can continue funding all contributors in the project. So there's a lot of details here with regards to the mandate and the purpose of the foundation, and more on the initiatives. I think a couple highlights that I'll have here is that there's actually like a very clear reporting and documentation process that the foundation will be engaging with. Not only will we have an annual report that is similar to the one that we send to the foundation's supervisory authority, but we'll also be doing financial reporting with regards to foundation funds, and we'll be supporting with the financial reporting of orgs. And the goal here is to support with a little bit more of just provide a little bit more support to orgs to allow them to be transparently communicating with the DAO as a whole, and providing quarterly reports that break down the operations, legal, marketing, and community/governance related services that are provided to orgs, as well as kind of what those orgs are spending. So I think that the foundation org with the operations committee will act and provide a lot more operational support to the orgs, which will also create more transparency and clarity for people who are on the outside looking into basically how the DAO is spending and what is it spending on. So the composition of the foundation org, as I said, is made up of the foundation council, whose current members are myself, Ellie, and Alexi. The foundation council, the responsibilities are listed here. I won't go into all of them. But the point here is that we're also transitioning some responsibilities away from the council, in that the council is becoming less of a coordinator of core team work and more of an overseer of the committee's work, and that these committee, these bodies, these operation, marketing, and governance bodies will very much so be acting more autonomously and consulting with the foundation org only on a quarterly basis versus a monthly basis. And again, having more of an overseer relationship versus an explicit coordinator. So you can check in here on the responsibilities to basically see how they've changed from what we have now. The committees, we have operations, whose current contributors are Angie, Sally, Yuval, and Wendy. And operations is doing everything. They're making the ship, they're keeping the ship from sinking, and providing a bunch of operational services to orgs, including monthly reporting, managing contributor agreements, facilitating relationships with service providers, and supporting the actual formation and management of the legal entities that are required for these orgs to function. They're also providing really critical legal risk assessments for the Radicle DAO and its orgs, and helping manage contributor relations to make sure that these orgs are working well. We're also, we'll be planning on managing the subscriptions to any relevant infrastructure that supports the Radicle DAO ecosystem, trademarks and IP, as I mentioned, and of course, managing the ongoing maintenance of the foundation entity with accounting, invoicing, reporting, and internal facilitation of the council's relationship with the committees. So that's a very brief overview for a very large chunk of work. So I don't want to minimize how much the operations team is doing. Next up, we have marketing. Marketing is being led by Sean, and we'll have Becca and Brandon as a consultant as well. Brandon as a multi-agent across the ecosystem. So marketing is pretty straightforward, and I'm sure Sean will be providing a little bit more of a look into how he's going to be formatting the marketing committee moving forward. But the marketing team is responsible for anything from content creation, delivery, market feedback in support of orgs to support their own go-to-market strategies and product positioning, coordination of in-person and online events and sponsorships, developing competitive landscapes, marketing strategies, messaging guidelines, all of that. Also basically bringing us into this new brand evolution by creating a more comprehensive marketing strategy, not just for the orgs themselves, but the DAO itself, including a new brand hierarchy, which we've already kind of initiated, and actually executing on what the transition of our distribution channels, our community channels, to basically support this new and envisioned brand evolution, in which the RadicleDAO is now this entity that funds Radicle and Drips and the rest of the orgs in the ecosystem. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to do there, brand and messaging frameworks, community work. We're very excited to have Sean leading the charge there. And then finally, just to wrap up, we have the DAO governance support. The current contributors are myself, Shelby, Joel, and Apiary. Apiary is actually a grant-funded team that has been supporting with more in-depth governance work here. And so the responsibilities here are basically facilitating the governance processes for the DAO and for the orgs themselves. So this means managing proposal cycles, enforcing the governance process, maintaining and managing our DAO-wide communication channels, developing and maintaining documentation to make sure that all of this is clear and makes sense. And finally, it's coordinating more specific and targeted community-driven work around specific governance initiatives. For example, facilitating the formalization of a RadicleDAO purpose, vision, and mission, which is another initiative that was basically spawned from the offsite. Developing a more mission-aligned approach and strategy for evolving ecosystem governance, continuously assessing and evolving governance needs of the DAO and researching, devising solutions to help solve those problems, and researching, developing new coordination mechanisms for improving our participation in governance. And actually, actually looking into treasury diversification and management. So looking into how we can extend our runway, apply this asset that our DAO governs in more smart and effective ways. So that's a very, again, sorry for having to, since we're really over, I'll end there with regards to what these committees are doing, but I'm sure that you'll be seeing more on the forum, and we'll have time next week to actually discuss some of these things more in depth. So again, the structure, the foundation is the foundation. So the entity is actually our Swiss foundation. It's governed by the Foundation Council, and the foundation will form these ops, marketing, and governance committees to enable the work that's outlined above. So, yep, I'll pin it there. Again, this proposal is live for voting right now for the next couple of hours. So you can go read through on Boardroom, so you can see how much funding is being requested, how it's going to be managed, and kind of more of the details that I just reviewed very briefly in this discourse post. So I'll stop there and unshare and take any questions that people want to wrap up with. Cool. Okay, well, if there's no
I
questions.
just wanted to add
go ahead.
one quick note. So on all of these org proposals, if you haven't seen it yet, we have now passed the governance improvements proposal, which does instantiate this monthly governance cycle. All of the changes that were listed in the governance improvements proposal are now valid as of April 1st. So this month will actually be the first month we're doing this monthly proposal cycle. The only one that doesn't, the kind of outlaw for this is the foundation org proposal, because it was posted before April 1st. So it's following the old kind of ad hoc process. But now we have these this monthly cycle. So all of these org proposals are posted up for discussion now for these first 2 weeks of the month. And the third week of the month, starting on the third Monday of the month, will be when the formal review, the snapshot votes will happen for all of these proposals, and then on the fourth week, so the fourth Monday or Tuesday of the month, is when the on-chain votes will happen. So this is, I just wanted to do a quick call out there because this will be the first month that we're doing this cycle, and in hopes that it will make it kind of following and planning and voting a lot easier for not only the proposal authors, but just the community in general. So yeah, just wanted to do a quick call out there. We will be doing, as Abby mentioned, we'll have our first proposal review next week. So instead of governance calls, we are calling them proposal reviews because we really just want these calls to be focused on discussing the proposals that will be going through governance in the last 2 weeks of the month. So next week, we'll have kind of a time and space for more questions on these proposals. And I will write another announcement about that going forward, or yeah, at the end of the week or the beginning of next week, just so everybody knows what to expect for that call. But yeah, just wanted to add that quick note.
Awesome. And we'll do a quick write-up and drop it in the core channel as well, so everybody has all this information.
Yeah,
Cool.
I will also, so this is recorded and I was taking notes, and I'll also like release some sort of note and recording combo links later this week, just so everybody has everything from the call.
Cool. Awesome. Well, let's end it there since we're almost 30 minutes over. Thank you everybody who stayed on and rode this out with us. We really appreciate it. Had a lot of information to communicate, and hope everybody's feeling aligned about where we're going for 2023. So we'll end it here. Me and Shelby will provide the recording in a follow-up, and then we'll see everybody in a quarter. Have a great week, everybody.
Thank you both for running this. Thanks all for attending.
Thanks, everyone.